You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word. My guest today is Maria Urso, Director of Medical Communications at Exact Sciences. With nearly 15 years of experience in medical affairs, Maria has built and led high-performing teams, developed innovative programs, and played pivotal roles in strategic planning, evidence generation, field team education, research initiatives, and advocacy efforts. In her current role at Exact Sciences, Maria elevates the scientific narrative surrounding the company's product portfolio to amplify the evidence base and drive impactful scientific storytelling. Before transitioning to the healthcare industry, Maria served as an active duty major in the U.S. Army and as a research scientist at the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine. Maria is also a nutrition specialist and evidence-based educator on optimizing nutrition and performance for first responders, tactical athletes, government, and corporate organizations through a company known as O2X. Maria has run over 75 marathons and serves as a pace setter for national and international marathons. In 2023, she paddled from the Bahamas to Florida in 15 hours to raise money for cystic fibrosis research. I am exhausted and extremely excited reading that bio. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thanks for having me on.
Very happy to have you here with us. So first and foremost, you and I are speaking on Veterans Day, so I want to take a moment to just thank you for your service.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and it's just something I love that we have a day to just recognize. I reach out to people I've served with in the past, and it's nice to hear from different people. So it's so appreciated to be acknowledged.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so much for us to talk about in your background. I want to hit it all. But tell us a little bit more about this professional journey of yours, which sounds like it started in science and transitioned into applying science to communications. Best as I can tell. Tell us a little bit more about that path.
I love science. I think I was probably 3 or 4 looking through the Toys R Us catalog. Aging myself, I would get it before Christmas. And I got the microscope and the chemistry kit, and those were the things that I wanted when I was small. As it was just I loved science and the aspect of science and experiments and learning how things work, and it just followed me. While I thought I'd go into medicine to actually treat patients, I still always found my way back, literally under the microscope, looking at, but
Interesting.
how does this cell work? How is this drug impacting something? So I followed that through my doctorate. And one of the things that I was always passionate about too was, you talked about my military service. That was something I wanted to do, but human performance and how do we just get people bigger, better, faster and stronger?
Yeah.
And even how it applied to myself. I always loved running. It was just something that helped me from a mindful perspective. I didn't compete when I was young. It was just something I did. And I found a really nice intersection when I was working on my doctorate with appreciating skeletal muscle because it's such an adaptable tissue.
Mhm.
Everything we do is reflected in skeletal muscle, whether you eat too much, you don't eat enough, or what you're eating, or what drugs you're taking. If you remember way back when cholesterol lowering medications were actually damaging skeletal muscle. And so I really found this nice intersection of evaluating that tissue and understanding it from a biochemistry standpoint and scientific research. So it was a natural progression to working in human populations and understanding how they respond. But as you could imagine, most of the research in human performance was working with Olympians or top tier athletes. And the other population are tactical athletes. So your soldiers and tactical populations like police, law enforcement, firefighters. So when I went into the military, they had roles for biochemists, and you can work in cash or you can, in a military hospital
Mhm.
and do research. So I did research. And throughout my research career, I loved the writing. I loved every aspect of it. But telling the story about what happened was so important to me. And what I learned is the work that I was doing, I was not doing anything really sexy. I was figuring out how a signaling pathway turned on and what made a signaling pathway turn off. And when you talk about that, it's really not that translational, especially when my audience at that time was who is delivering funding to our research program.
Sure.
And in most cases, those were generals or directors of entire programs that were not science based. And so I became skilled in telling these stories about what I was doing, related to
Yeah.
phosphorylation of a protein or a signaling pathway, but I had to translate that. And I just realized I was pretty darn good at it and I liked it. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am now is
I
just
love
really
that.
working on the communication end of how to explain complex science and how to make sure that it's accessible for all different types of audiences.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was thinking when you were talking about skeletal muscle, I imagine you've are at least following with interest the conversations around GLP-1s right now. And I've just read recently about how there's definitely a move toward creating some newer drugs that don't have the same impact on muscle tissue. Something they're
Yeah.
kind of trying to figure out right now. So,
We could
uh,
do a whole podcast on
no,
that.
I
It
bet.
is, when I talk to people, the first thing you hear is that eating is not as exciting. I'm like, "But eating is so much fun."
Yeah,
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 and
yeah,
and how do you balance that? But, I mean, we've done things before. Pharmacological, I feel like, intermittent fasting had its heyday, and I would have to talk to people and say, "But if your goal is to go out and perform in an endurance event, you cannot do intermittent fasting."
yeah,
So,
yeah.
it seems like whatever we're working with or dealing with, we have to appreciate how the body works and adapts in order to make it work for us.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm a former yoga teacher and, a dancer of musical theater background. So I've a less scientific, more sort of intuitive, experiential experience with the body, but probably no less fascinated by it.
With the same process as you're thinking through and it's intentional when,
Hmm.
with the yoga, it's everything you're doing is so intentional. And how is this limb moving and how is this side compared to that side? Or how am I at the beginning of class
Yeah.
versus the end of class? And
Yeah, and I think, it's as you were saying, you want to know the why. It is amazing what you can learn even in that context if you are able to pay attention and really stop and feel and experience. And again, that's not the same as being under the microscope, but kind of putting yourself under the microscope. There is that it's about the ability to pay attention and kind of listen and so lots of that's for our follow-up. Lots of other places we could go
part
there.
two.
Yeah. So I'm curious about since you came in the pathway, and I know it's not unheard of by any means, right, to come into communications from a scientific background. We certainly see that in your area. We see that in, business development, let's say in life sciences companies as well, where that can be a real advantage. Um, I'm curious, like kind of on the flip side. So now you have a comms role, but a scientific background, where before you were it had a scientific role and were building those communications chops. Um, what do you feel like are the benefits of having skill sets in both areas? And were there any like I guess unexpected challenges or blind spots that came up for you with the scientific background as you transitioned into comms work?
I think that probably the benefits is the continuum. When we think about working with marketing, is marketing knows what they want to say. They say, I want to be able to say this. But it's really difficult sometimes when you don't come from that scientific background to know all the steps needed to get to say this. What is
Hmm.
the clinical trial? What does it look like? How big does it need to be? Do we need to do a modeling study because it's, or do we need real world evidence? So I think I get to cheat a little bit when it comes to the marketing angle is I know what I want to say, or I can hear what, my teammates and my collaborators want to say.
Hmm.
And then I know what's going to go into that. So I can kind of be that checkpoint in the middle saying, we'll never be able to say that. Or
Yeah.
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 So yeah. Or how can we massage it to say it, in something that's that we can create. And then the other benefit is that I feel like you can also empower in that same way too.
Mhm.
So, thinking from a scientific communication platform and you want it to be dynamic and changing and evolving. And so making sure you check in and say, well, you said you wanted to be able to say this, and we're putting it in our platform as a maybe, an aspiration. And then the steps you have to work with and everyone behind you. When I say behind you, as I mean like that force,
Mhm.
as far as the clinical trial team and the development team and where we need what we need to do behind the scenes to get there. So I
Yeah.
feel like that's a benefit is knowing that knowing how to make the sausage.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like you're able to maybe like let's say look at the data and as you said tell that story more, or maybe because of your scientific background recognize like, hey, this isn't just another data point, like this is the really exciting part of it, where maybe it's not being delivered to you in that fashion, but you're able to kind of identify those pieces and like give them a little bit of an exclamation point in your in your work.
Yeah, am laughing because in the middle you said they're really exciting. And I find that I do exactly that. I'll pull out 3 or 4 aspects that are I physically, when I present the data, I am moving into the chart. Like, I am living with that graph and that data point, embracing it. Like, how can you not be excited by this? And so I find that being able to I mean, you get so many numbers when you think of a readout. There's the top line data that makes the press release. And then, well, what about this? And we're slicing and dicing and
Mhm.
exploring. And it's really easy to get into the nuanced aspects of it, but being able to tie into the big fat so whats and what matters and what's exciting, and not just tell it as a number. Like, what does this number mean? Like, help me visualize again what's happening inside the body related to this one
Yeah.
number, or why is this one number this way? And I think that gives people, especially visual thinkers,
Mhm.
is instead of seeing a number like, okay, 84 is higher than 67, but tying it into the body and what's happening, you can see why 84 is so much more exciting than 67.
Yeah, 100%. It takes context, right, to give some of that data meaning. If that's like astronomically better than anyone has done it before, that's you need to know that versus, oh, this is like half of what we were expecting. I mean, the same data could produce kind of both could have both meanings. You've got to actually lock into kind of that grounding and context. So that makes a lot of sense. Um,
And
any unforeseen challenges or even adjustments you needed to make that you felt like as you transitioned into comms?
I think transitioning into industry, and I'm
Mm,
pretty sure most people make this transition. I see it, I feel it, it's palpable, is you have to be able to let go of the granularity and you have to be okay with the pace. So I think at the beginning, I mean, when you're a scientist, if there's one phrase I remember from my advisor, it was see one rat, think 10, which means there can be no mistakes at all in anything you produce. Because
yeah.
if someone sees one mistake, they're going to question everything that led up to that mistake, your
Hmm.
scientific method, the data
Sure.
that came out, how you analyzed it. And so I think you just get so wrapped into perfection. And it's not that things are not perfect, but we're not digging into that granular level. We're not reading things out to the thousandth place anymore. We're rounding them up. So
Hmm.
you have to it's a little bit more free flowing and just being a little bit more comfortable, and this is good enough. It's really good, and it's good enough because this is the way it's delivered, and we're gonna deliver a new piece in 3 weeks, and then another new piece. It's always evolving. It's not like this is my seminal paper, and that's gonna be living there forever.
Right.
So, yeah, there's the one putting it out on paper and being able to elevate it a few levels up, and then the other is knowing that you're constantly evolving that story and telling
Hmm.
it better and adding to it. It's not forever. It's not living there forever as like this fundamental piece. You're gonna have to retract something from a scientific journal.
Right. Right. It's interesting too, as you were talking about the pace a little bit, where someone shared with me, and this is more in like a management context, but it's like a cartoon, And so it's like what you see as the leader, right? And it's someone who's like the captain of the ship. And you're just like, dum dum dum, like, why is nothing getting done? Right? Like everything's going too slowly, nothing's happening. And then what you see when you're like a team member and you're like running around frantically on the deck, like scrubbing the deck and, doing the sails and doing all these things. And it's just like that difference of perspective. And so not that there's the same level of judgment, but like when you're waiting for data to come in, that can feel probably like a much slower timeline versus being the person generating the data who's constantly busy and feels like they're moving on to the next thing just as quickly as they can. So I imagine that shift in perspective, even in and of itself, is an adjustment.
Yeah, I can imagine even for you too, in your position where you probably have to hand some things off, some projects that you're working on, and then to deliver them. And when you're trying, I mean, your role is to be creative, is how
Yeah.
creative can you be? And that's not something that happens quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, sometimes it's, you have to create it once, knock it down, fine tune it. It's kind of like you're on that receiving end sometimes too, and you have to be delicate as a leader because you don't wanna rush someone along because you might squash that creativity.
100%. I'll say I feel it most keenly in our own goals. So we use the OKR system. I mean, we set goals every quarter inside the
Mhm.
business, and we're a small agency. 4 people make up our core team, and so in some ways, I am still surprised that we set goals for a quarter out, and I'm like, wow. It takes us 90 days to do this. And could we do some things faster? Sure. Some things get done on the way as milestones, but you see how quickly it's like we meet and then, okay, let's regroup in a week. And then it's Thanksgiving and another week goes by. And so it feels when you're in it like you're working just as quickly as you can. And then sometimes you pull back and you're like, how did that take 6 weeks?
Yeah, it's like we're moving constantly. We're making forward progress, but yeah, I can't believe it came across as, yeah, 6 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that was a challenge too, is just learning with so many stakeholders how long
Hmm.
something can take. And then you need to have that. I mean, you need to have the different inputs. So instead of being a sole contributor and, okay, I can sit down and I can write this paper in a weekend and then do this. And,
Right.
your holdup was had the review process of the journal maybe. So yeah, it's hard when you,
Yeah, it's true. And I think always trying to balance, I would say in medical communications, that balance is tipped more, right, to de-risking, toward getting more perspectives, toward making sure that you've got everything right. Um, in some other work that we do, let's say on the thought leadership side, we're probably trying to say, okay, we need the stakeholders we need, but let's not have 3 extra people on there because that's just gonna slow down the process and maybe isn't quite necessary. But you always gotta find the balance, I think depending on what the organization can kind of tolerate, and also what kind of communication it is and w what it takes to get right and sort of what the risk level is there too.
yeah. Well, you probably had to do this. I don't know if it's as necessary with a four-person team, but our company about 3 years ago, we initiated from the leadership level this DAI model. So where you do have so many people and everybody wants to be an advisor and everybody wants to be informed, and then the person gets informed and they have input, they turn into an A, and then the A turns into a
Ah,
D.
yes, yes, yes.
So now it's like we can get things done faster if we know who owns which role and
Yeah,
we empower them with that decision, and depending on what level you are. And
yeah.
it's been helpful. So helpful in fact that I've actually used it in my life. Like if my family's planning something, like, I am gonna be the D. If this is, not the restaurant we're all going to, you could tell me that. But yeah, I feel like with a lot of the projects that we have to put together and you have so many stakeholders, you have to be true to that, or it could take double the time
Yeah.
by the
Well,
time
and
you
it's great
do
to
that.
hear, obviously, in your setting that it's being followed through on, which is the most important
Mhm.
thing, right? That
Yeah.
people, once they agree to it, they commit to it.
Yeah.
Um, so tell us a little bit more about your experience. You've talked a little bit about the scientific background, but I'd love to hear more about your experience in the Army and if there are any key lessons, whether that's around communication or just around life, that you would like to share that you've taken with you.
You know, I tell a lot of people, especially now, some of my friends have children who are considering going into the services. And I tell them that the military was probably the best decision of my life as far as professional development.
I've heard that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
everyone I went in after my PhD. I was not a traditional, person who went through ROTC or went through high school, or out of high school. When I finished my PhD was when I decided instead of a postdoc, that's what I was going to do. It made sense to me, and everybody in my circle, from family members to my advisor to everyone said, "This is the worst. This is career suicide. This is the worst decision you could possibly make." And it just didn't feel that way to me. I felt like I knew where I had learned. I'd spent 10 years of my life in the sciences, doing science, reading science, learning about science, and there were so many aspects that I didn't have a chance to do. And one, I mean, just learning about your country and the world and working with people, but most importantly, accountability, leadership, and brevity. And so the hardest for me was probably brevity,
That's so
and
hard.
yeah, and being everything you hear and receive, especially and possibly even as a woman too, is, that if someone's not using more words or they're not delivering it in like with a lift at the end or something, it feels less compassionate or it feels
Mhm.
and that's not what it's about. It's about the more you're saying, the more things could be misinterpreted. So it's so funny
So
to me that I ended
interesting.
up in medcoms because never when I left my PhD and went into the military did I think that this was going to lead to a career in medcoms. But it really is about that. We want to be brief so that we don't dilute the message or we don't confuse people or something doesn't get lost,
Right.
with everything. And you think of it like it's so literal that the whole reason you want to be that way is there's noise, there's bombs, there's gunshots, there's screaming, there's everything that's going on in the chaos. You have to make sure that what you're saying can be heard among the chaos.
Wow.
So it's just incredible to me how easily it translates in a different sense. And then accountability. There was no why didn't this get done? And then you could turn around and give 15 reasons why it didn't get done.
Mhm.
You're the reason if someone's looking at you asking why it didn't get done, you're the
It's
reason.
rhetorical. Yeah.
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 And so just ownership and accountability, appreciating that for myself and even for others. And just a leadership too. How to lead and stay with your troops and the people that are with you and understanding what each person needs to get to where you're going because you all have
Mhm.
a common goal and to get there. So I never when I was in it was like, here I am learning lessons for life. Like,
Yeah,
let me
sure.
take notes of this. But I reflect on it all the time. I really do think of it all the time. And
That's
it
so
was good.
interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
I love what you were saying about brevity. It made me think like one of the, you kind of develop some like shortcut rules for yourself about the way the world works. I think we all do this, but one of the things I think about is when we work with companies, and I think we're a little bit smarter about setting expectations around this now, but and you talk about something like tone of voice, right? And it's like, oh, we want to be warm, we want to be friendly, we want to be this. And then we write something and it's like, oh, well, this is so many words and all these extras. And I'm like, that's what makes someone sound warm and friendly. I get it. Like all that extra kind of add on stuff, if you strip that away, you could do that. But you're not going to sound warm and friendly anymore. Like you've got
No.
to kind of understand that when you ask for that in a tone, you're asking for all those little extra words to kind of soften things or um, just feel more personable or more welcoming. Like that is literally adding words in 99% of the time. That's what it takes. And so you got to understand what you're really going to get as a manifestation if you ask for that kind of tone. And that's important to you because, yeah, on the other side, you can feel a little, you know, maybe not curt, but again, it depends on the audience and how they're perceiving it. Obviously, in the settings you're talking about, there's everyone's kind of on the same page, right, with the need for that and why. When you're putting language like that out more broadly, you may not, have an audience that is understanding that. So just kind of interesting, made me think about that.
Yeah. You know what I find even right now in that same sense? And so this is probably controversial. I think people are hearing that is we are so inundated with information. You should strive to be brief and to work on brevity. But I find everyone's replacing the words with emojis and pictures. So and just me personally, and I get it, I get, like, at the end of an email where you are brief, you might put an exclamation point or, like, a wink or something just to soften it, but I just feel like, I scroll through LinkedIn maybe, and instead of a bulleted list, everything's got, like, 8 emojis and pictures, and I personally start to lose focus. I was like, "How
Yeah.
did they decide on that emoji?
Yeah,
And why is
yeah.
it the one? And why is it like, what does that mean? Am I missing something in the text? Because that emoji doesn't really match the text." So I personally am challenged by the pictures that are
Mhm.
accompanying words that have been taken out.
Yeah, there was this old show on Nickelodeon, and I'm dating myself for sure, but, I think it was, like, something to do with rebuses, but it just reminds me of that because it was all these different pictures, and you had to try and figure out what the message was, and it's like, "What are these emojis trying to tell me?" Uh, I love
Yeah.
that. So let's talk a little bit about running.
Okay.
You're not just a runner, right? You're a pace setter for marathons, run 75 marathons. Um, Tell me how you said you always loved running, but how did this become something that is so competitive for you?
Well, very first, 2 things. One, I laugh because whenever I'm with my friends, I was like, "Can we not talk about running?" Because so many of my friends run, and all they talk about is running, and I'm so sick of talking about running. There's nothing to talk about. It's the most basic form of movement, like one foot, other foot in front of the other. I'm like, "That's all there is to say." So when we talk about running, I was like, "Do we have to talk about it?" The other part is I really was never competitive. Even growing up in sports, I love to play sports. I love to try
Yeah.
new sports and pick them up. But I was never trying to, like, beat someone. I never had, like, strategy in mind, like, with
Okay.
basketball, like, I'd be, like, sitting there, like, "What is this pick thing?" And, it just wasn't exciting, but I just felt so free, like, I feel like it's playing when I run.
Yeah.
My dad ran, again, just, in the '70s when running started to bloom. I guess it was a nice offset because everyone smoked too. So, it's like, let's smoke and then run.
Then run.
And yeah, and so I ran, I would jog with him, or when he'd watch me, he'd
Nice.
take me to the track and I'd run around the track. And so it was just always something I did. And the more I did it, the more I loved it. And I
Mhm.
met people. I've always met people through that. It's opened a lot of doors
Nice.
for me.
Mhm.
From professional ways. I remember I ran New York City was my very first marathon, and
Nice.
that was back in 1997. I said, "I have to run a marathon before I'm 22," like I was gonna be old and gray. So, I ran that, and then I loved it, and so I ran one the next year, and I remember when I was running it, I was close to the finish, and the guy next to me says, are you trying to qualify for Boston?" And I was like, "What's Boston?" Like, I didn't even know what the Boston Marathon was.
Yeah.
And I said, "What do you mean qualify?" And he says, "Well, if you run this time," and I was like, "I guess so." And so then I ran Boston every year, and I just fell into it, and I loved it. And I'd say in the Army, it was a great thing. I was on the All Army Marathon team, but when I showed up for boot camp, as a post PhD student, probably one of the older people there who was a
Mhm.
new entry into the military, that at least, like, set me apart when we had PT test on the first day. It's like,
Yeah.
"Alright, she'll probably be
She
okay
can
if
hang.
we go."
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I again, like, I did always did well. I ran well, I stayed strong, and a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to pace a race where you just
Yeah.
run, and so what a pace setter is they say, "Okay, everyone who wants to finish this marathon, let's say, in 3 hours and 35 minutes, and you have to run consistently, like, an 8-minute and 12-second mile." And so I have either, like, a jacket or a flag or a thing, and I just run that like a robot, but you're also a cheerleader. You're
Mhm.
keeping everyone together, you're encouraging, and it's just it was everything together that I just loved doing as I was running. I got to be a cheerleader, I got
That's
to tell
awesome.
people that, build them up those last 6 miles when it's just not great, and just keep them in the game for it. And so I started doing that, and I love it. And so now just travel all over and pace. I've gotten some great experiences to pace the
It's really
London
cool.
Marathon. I paced in Rome, which is
Okay.
you have these pictures of you, like, running past, like,
The
every
the
I
Colosseum and
was
yeah.
so in Rome, and it's just oh, it's such a gr I love it, and I continue to meet wonderful people, and yeah, it's
That's
just been a
awesome.
great thing. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So, last question, I think, before we move into the one big idea. Um, Career related question as well. You mentioned kind of before the call that there was a moment for you or some kind of inflection point where you said, "Oh, my career's not going to quite be here. It's going to be over here." And then you really leaned in. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what the results have been from that decision?
Sure, it was a little career and it was a little personal too. I
Okay.
was on the same stairway of life that most of my friends were you're gonna find someone, you're gonna meet someone, you're gonna get married, you're gonna have kids, you're gonna do this. And
Hmm.
in my mind, just the way I was brought up and what I thought is I was gonna have 4 kids and I was gonna stay home. Like I'd put my career on the shelf and then that was it. I was like, oh, I'll write, I'll consult on the side. And as I hit my mid 30s and that just wasn't happening, you know, I spent a couple of months, like, panicking, like, "Oh my gosh," I don't have a lot of time to pull this aspect of my life together, and so I really invested in that, and, oh gosh, it was exhausting. It wasn't fun. It was taking away from the things I really did like to do,
Yeah.
and so I finally just Maria, maybe that's just not your life. Like maybe this is the way it is because this is the reason. I know it sounds like overly Buddhist, but it just was so just accept it. Like don't fight it because it
Yeah.
seems like when you're fighting it to make happen what you think should happen, and so I just did that, and the one thing I said is, "I'm going to give the same do the same things that I would do." And so, you've said when before we talked, like, I said I've had a pretty awesome life, is
Yes.
I think it's given me that freedom to say yes a lot, and it is so fun to say yes. I appreciate that there's a selfish aspect to it, that I can say yes to so many things because I just have to consider myself in a lot of cases, but
Hmm.
it's really been a fun and productive way to live life.
That's so
And so
awesome.
yeah, and I feel and sometimes people say like, "Oh, you work so much and you do this and you do that, like all you care about is working." I'm like, "But I don't have some other things that take away." So when I'm not working, I say I take myself on honeymoons or I go on this adventure or I
Yeah.
do that, or like I said, like I'm gonna pace a marathon in Rome this weekend or Alaska that weekend. And so it's been nice to be able to make those decisions and do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Love to hear that. So we're going to transition kind of back into quite a professional topic, I would say, for our one big idea. We're going to deep dive into one insight, experience, or aspect of your work, and what we discussed. And I'm going to let you frame this up a little bit for us, but was scientific communication for multiple audiences. I think often we're talking about HCPs or healthcare providers and patients. Those are kind of two big audiences, of course. There can certainly be others, investors, things like that. Uh, what brought up this conversation was that Exact Communications, one of the products there is Cologuard, which is, positioned um, toward patients. It's a convenient screening option for them. So love to hear from you how you're thinking about what the current landscape looks like in terms of calibrating the messages and making sure they're really reaching these different audience segments, which can have quite different incentives, different, level of scientific understanding and different needs overall.
Sure. And it is just such a fun and exciting time to be in medical devices, especially in the diagnostics area, where diagnostics are being developed at just a remarkable rate. I think of 20 years ago when I was at the benchtop and we were trying to understand how DNA changed and how to measure those changes and how expensive it was. And now we're doing that on 20,000 samples a day in a
Yeah.
lab. And, when I think of the Cologuard test, is it's looking at those changes in DNA that are related to cancer. And that's a tissue-based test. And colorectal cancer is a great example of kind of where I feel like we're at right now because everybody does it when they're above the age of 45.
Hmm.
It's something you're supposed to do. Your provider is supposed to talk to you about it. Your insurance company will likely reimburse you for colorectal cancer screening. Medicare and Medicaid health systems get quality credits for doing it. So providers are incentivized to talk to their patients and to make sure their patients do it and to stay on top of it. But where we are in the screening and diagnostic space is these blood tests and everything from on social media when you're scrolling through and this blood test will tell you your age and this blood test will, tell you your hormone levels and this blood test will tell you allergies. And now we have big, large scale clinical trials for these multi-cancer early detection tests where a blood sample can say, do you have cancer or not? A test now instead for colorectal cancer screening. So we have a lot of options and there's a lot of tools that patients are being marketed to. So we have this direct to consumer marketing. The problem is a lot of the providers are just not getting immersed in the limitations of these tests or even the
Hmm.
benefits of these tests. Most of these tests are not yet reimbursed by insurance companies, and providers don't get those same quality credits for them. So they're not as incentivized to provide education to their patients. So, from a medical communications standpoint, these tests are out there and we want to market them. And we have very strong, direct to consumer marketing, but it's so important that the patients understand what these tests are and what they're not when we communicate with our providers about the tests and our top line data is not only allowing them to understand it, but they're asking us when I sit in an advisory board or listening sessions, the providers are saying, will you help me with language on how to talk to my patients about this?
Hmm.
I have less than a minute to talk about all the panels I need to screen them for. How am I going to dive into you're taking their DNA and looking at their DNA, and they don't know
Yeah.
sensitivity or specificity or early stage cancer, late stage cancer. So it's really nuanced from a medcom's perspective. And
Hmm.
we need to become really, again, we need to work on brevity, and so give the providers educate them so they understand the test, but then give them the tools so that they can give it to their patients quickly so they understand what the limitations are.
Yeah, I love that. And we had a recent guest on, a good friend of mine who's actually a physical therapist. So we took
Oh,
communication in like a really interesting direction. But one of the things she talked about was in larger group settings, how you kind of have to go to this lowest common denominator idea, right? And like I think sometimes that phrase gets kind of a bad stigma around it, but basically saying you need to start by making sure everybody can understand. So how do you think about maybe that, knowing that you've got some patients who are going to need the most basic explanation. And then you do have the patients, I probably one of them, who might be like, how does that work exactly? And wants to know more of the details and is willing to kind of get into the science and um but that's not everybody, right? How do you think about being able to kind of stair step, let's say, that communication so that the people who want to really dig in have what's available, but you're not shortchanging the folks who are, really learning it from a more basic level.
one of the biggest things that I mean, I love my team is probably so sick of me saying this word, publication extenders. And I don't just think of them as taking the clinical evidence and extending that into a thing. I think of it as the whole continuum. So what you're saying is taking that clinical trial and the clinical data we have and focusing on just a few of them. We don't need every single thing that's published. And then all the branches that come off of that. So we're going to have an audio version. We're going to have a video version. We're going to have an
Hmm.
infographic. We're going to have like a quick one-page summary, plain language summary. But then each one of those, it's almost like a family tree. And then like they're
Yeah.
going to have children. And, some of them may be a QR code that you give to your patient after the discussion. And it can lead
Hmm.
them to everything from maybe the clinician brochure to an infographic designed for patients. So I think it's just having these pathways, like pretty much an education journey and because everybody learns differently, everybody grasps it
Yeah.
differently, and then they can kinda look at this menu from this one thing and
Mhm.
say, "Okay, there's 10 different pieces I can choose from, I'm gonna pick these 3 because I'll learn and my patients will learn." So, that's just my preference, I guess,
Yeah,
is to
yeah. I
focus
think
on
over
one
on the
thing.
content world, they call that repurposing, right? It's like,
Yes.
oh, we could turn it into this and this and this and all these different assets that we can create. So allowing them to kind of self-serve a little bit more based on how they want to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then how about thinking about, you talked about how the incentives are aligned a little differently or maybe less aligned from kind of a financial perspective. But I imagine, of course, you can lean on the idea that providers want to help their patients. But you're marketing to them as well. So while you're giving them the information, you're also trying to kind of influence them. So can you talk a little bit about how you're navigating that and making sure you're, doing that with integrity, but also highlighting the benefits to, get them to take that extra minute to talk about the screening.
At the end of the day, I always think that providers are people too, and
Yeah.
no provider wants to be not trusted by a patient, or, like,
Sure.
providers want their patients' trust, is they want to be trusted, and so if they tell their patient to take a test that has maybe a very high false positive rate, and chasing down that false positive means you're taking a lot of follow-up tests and
Mm,
exams and maybe an invasive procedure, or the alternative, it has a pretty low true positive rate, poor sensitivity, and now you tell the patient's like, "Well, my test said I was negative." It's like, "Yeah, but there's still a 38% chance you might have this disease."
yeah.
And so I think that providers need to earn their patients' trust by helping them to understand, like, it's great if you take this test, someone's going to from a, incentivized
Hmm.
position, but also being able to earn their trust through the aftercare.
Hmm.
And knowing that they're there for that aftercare, they walk them through the whole scenario and, they have their provider's trust. And what they're
Yeah.
recommending to them really does feel like it's in their best interest.
Hmm.
And or maybe even saying, like, "Thanks for asking me about that test. I know you read about it, but I don't think you need it." Or, that you're not at that time period yet. Let's think about it when you come back next year for your visit. So I do think there's the trust aspect of it.
Yeah. That's something I'm thinking about too. You really set up my next question nicely, which is I think we're in an age where, in general, like in all areas, right, we are very focused on data. And I think there's a sort of assumption underlying that more data is better. And I think what's true is more data that you can use to some effective end is better, right? Um, so how do you think about and and is this something where you're working with providers or do you think about yourself as the company that's offering screenings like what next, right? So I get this, I'm a patient, I take a diagnostic, I get some piece of information about myself. Now what? And I think especially as these tests are starting to come out that are maybe it's not a clear pathway or it's more predictive, it's this could happen to you. How do you think about your role in helping answer for that patient? Like, now what? I have the data, but what really helps, right, is what you do with it from there.
Yeah. And I think that, again, from a medical communication standpoint and so much data, is what data can we elevate about the
Mhm.
what next? What happens
Yeah.
to the patients 3 years from now? Or what happens to patients that made this choice? Or,
Mhm.
where do we see gaps even? So, the patients aren't following up. So I think about an example of is there most of the tests we have to do for screening, we need to do every year or every 3 years or every 5 years. And again, making sure that we show, like, I'm glad, thank you for doing it this time. This is what we've shown is that patients who do it every time, and when I need to see you again in 3 years, or
Yeah.
we've watched out for your health in this way. So I think highlighting the data that continues to show benefit or like the long term
Mhm.
of it.
Yeah.
So, Yeah.
Love that. All right. I want to take us into our recurring segment. This is our wrap up. So we've just got 5 lightning round questions. You ready? Ready for
I'm
these?
ready.
Awesome. All right. Question number 1. What is your favorite word to say out loud?
Often.
Oh, great.
Someone told me once that you're not supposed to say the T, and they like stopped me from talking. And I was like, wait, what? And they said, no, it's often. I said, there's a T in it. And they said, well, you're not supposed to say it. And so now I say it so intentionally. I say the word often.
With
And
that
I say
hard
the
T.
T.
Hit that T. Love it. What's a word you know from reading, but you're not quite sure how to
Oh
pronounce it
my
out
God.
loud?
I was laughing about just thinking about this word to you because um I'm gonna try and say it correctly. This is ridiculous. On entrepreneurial. Entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur. Oh my gosh.
Is this ridiculous?
No, it's that second R is a nightmare. I literally worked for an entrepreneurial consulting agency and I am an entrepreneur.
You
And
are.
yeah, and that second R just gets you every time.
Even the beginning, I look at the word, I get it, but when I have to say, like, I'll use different words so I don't have to say that word in a public
Business
setting.
owner. Yeah.
Really smart strategic person who came up with their own idea.
Love it. What's one phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
Oh, literally. Literally, right now, it's in everything. I don't mind saying literal, that's
Yeah.
fine, but I just thought that we make so much fun of the word literally being used every other word that people would stop, but I think it's gotten worse.
Okay.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not used correctly in most cases, which is ironic given the word. Yeah. All right. What's a communication hill? I'm going to change the wording up on you a little bit, given a recent podcast episode we recorded. What's a communication hill you're willing to plant your flag on?
Oh, it's gonna be, don't dilute the message. Do not dilute the message. Yeah, keep it simple, be brief.
Think about that
Everybody
brevity.
has to say the same thing. Yep.
Yeah, I love that.
We have 10 teams talking, all 10 of us are gonna say the same things. Yeah. That's
What's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that had a big impact on you or stuck with you?
I just saw Deliver Me From Nowhere this past weekend, the Bruce Springsteen movie.
Oh, yeah.
And my gauge on I'm not a crier, and my gauge on if something's good, a book or a movie, is if I
Yeah.
cry. And yeah, it got me. I think I was so surprised because the reviews were not very good. I think everyone was expecting this big, like, performing louder than like just how
Mhm.
Bruce is when he puts on but it shows the dark side and just
Yeah.
it's some tough things. So yeah, that really was that got me.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm a Jeremy Allen White fan, so, I love The Bear, so definitely to check that out. Yeah. So
It
good.
would see, I personally thought so good, and when you read the reviews, they're up and down on what they thought, but
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'll take your word for it, Maria. So I want to thank you for joining us today. If listeners want to learn more about you, what's the best place for them to find you?
LinkedIn is a good spot. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was really great being able to chat with you. Thanks
Thank
for
you
being
so
here.
much, Kristen. This was great.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.